On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Louise Fletcher, the American actress best remembered for her chilling portrayal of Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, passed away peacefully in her sleep on September 23, 2022, at the age of 88. Her death, though natural, was nonetheless symbolic, marking the quiet exit of a performer whose most famous role had embodied the very opposite of peace: control, repression, and the dehumanizing edge of institutional power. Her passing reflected the challenges of her generation of actors, many of whom navigated Hollywood during an era of shifting social values and the rise of realism in film. Fletcher's career had not been an easy climb. She took a long hiatus to raise her children and only returned to acting later in life, proving perseverance could yield extraordinary rewards. The fact that she left the world quietly, after a long and complete life, highlights the contrast between the turbulence of her iconic screen presence and the calm resolution of her personal journey. The immediate consequences of her passing included widespread reflection on the enduring legacy of Nurse Ratched, a character so culturally impactful that it became shorthand for authoritarian cruelty. Fletcher's Academy Award-winning performance transformed the character into one of cinema's most enduring villains, sparking conversations about power dynamics, mental health institutions, and the abuse of authority. In the wake of her death, media outlets and fans revisited not only her Oscar speech, delivered partly in American Sign Language to honor her deaf parents, but also her quiet determination as an actress who took risks in a male-dominated industry. Her death amplified her legend, ensuring that Fletcher would always be remembered less for the breadth of her roles than for the indelible mark of a single, unforgettable performance. Like many artists, her passing invited a re-evaluation of her entire career, including television appearances and supporting film roles that had been overshadowed by her Oscar-winning triumph. Fletcher's death reminds us of humanity's constant negotiation with mortality and memory. Figures like her live on through the characters they create, which often outlast their own lives. Through art, we immortalize not the person alone, but the meanings their work evokes: fear, power, vulnerability, or resilience. In Fletcher's case, her life closed in peace, but her legacy endures in the unsettling power of a role that continues to shape how we think about authority and compassion. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, died on September 23, 1939, in London at the age of 83. His death came after years of suffering from cancer of the jaw and mouth, a condition brought on in part by his lifelong cigar habit. Freud endured over 30 painful surgeries, yet he continued to write and correspond until his final days. His passing was not accidental or sudden, but rather a prolonged confrontation with mortality. In keeping with his lifelong commitment to rationality, Freud chose to end his suffering through physician-assisted morphine injections, reflecting his view that human beings should face death with dignity and autonomy. The timing of his death mirrored the turbulence of his era. Freud had fled Vienna the previous year following the Nazi annexation of Austria, as the rise of fascism threatened both his Jewish identity and his intellectual legacy. Settling in London, he lived out his last months in exile. His death occurred just weeks after the outbreak of World War II, a conflict that would violently reshape Europe and the world. In this context, Freud's departure symbolized the passing of a figure who had wrestled with the unconscious mind at a moment when collective fears, aggression, and authoritarian impulses were engulfing humanity. The immediate consequence of his passing was both grief and a heightened urgency to preserve his ideas. Psychoanalysis, controversial even in his lifetime, spread rapidly across Europe and the United States in the decades that followed. His students and followers carried forward his theories of the unconscious, repression, and dream analysis, while critics refined or opposed them. Death amplified Freud's legend. He became not just a doctor or theorist, but a cultural icon whose work influenced literature, art, philosophy, and even politics. Freud's death reveals the human struggle to reconcile intellect with mortality. His choice of an assisted death underscored his lifelong insistence that individuals confront reality, however uncomfortable. Humanity immortalizes Freud not only through medical and psychological practice, but also through artistic portrayals, biographies, and even everyday language, where terms like Freudian slip and Oedipus complex remain part of cultural memory. Ultimately, Freud's passing reminds us that while death closes a life, it can expand a legacy. His confrontation with suffering, his exile, and his final assertion of autonomy illuminate the deep connection between mortality, power, and memory, and how, through commemoration, ideas can transcend the limits of the body. Bob Fosse, the legendary choreographer, director, and dancer, died on September 23, 1987, at the age of 60. His death was sudden and dramatic. He collapsed from a heart attack on a Washington, D.C. sidewalk, just blocks away from the theater where his most iconic work, Sweet Charity, was about to be revived. The timing was almost theatrical, echoing the stage-like quality of his entire career. Fosse had battled heart problems for years. His heavy smoking, stress, and grueling work pace reflecting the intensity of an era where show business demanded relentless perfection. Fosse's death mirrored the dualities of his life: brilliance and excess, creativity and self-destruction. The 1980s were a period when America's cultural industries were both celebrating glitz and reckoning with burnout and loss, whether through the high demands of Hollywood or the tragedies emerging from the AIDS epidemic within the arts community. His collapse in public, at the very center of theater culture, symbolized the price many artists pay for chasing greatness in an unforgiving profession. The immediate consequence of his passing was shock and mourning in both Broadway and Hollywood. Fosse had already secured a singular place in history, being the only person to win an Oscar, Cabaret, a Tony, Pippin, and an Emmy, Liza with a Z, all in the same year. His death reinforced his myth as an innovator whose unique style, jazz hands, tilted bowler hats, and slouched postures, had transformed dance and stage performance forever. For many, his sudden end amplified his legend, much like the characters in his semi-autobiographical film, All That Jazz, where he eerily foreshadowed his own fatal heart attack. In a broader sense, Fosse's death highlighted the tension between artistry and mortality. His life demonstrated how the pursuit of brilliance often collides with human limits. Yet memory softens the tragedy. Fosse is immortalized through countless revivals of his shows, through the continued use of his choreographic vocabulary, and through pop culture homages ranging from Chicago's film adaptation to Beyoncé's and Michael Jackson's performances that drew from his style. Fosse's passing reminds us that while mortality halts the artist, it cannot silence their influence. Humanity preserves figures like him through performance, reinterpretation, and commemoration, ensuring that the rhythm of their creativity echoes long after their final curtain call. Mary Frann, best remembered for her role as Joanna Loudon on the beloved sitcom Newhart, passed away unexpectedly on September 23, 1998, at the age of 55. Her death came suddenly in her sleep from heart failure, a tragedy made all the more shocking because she had shown no visible signs of illness in the days prior. Unlike some stars whose lives were defined by controversy or decline, Frann's passing was quiet, natural, and deeply human, reflecting how even those in the limelight remain subject to the fragility of life. Frann's death in the late 1990s also mirrored a moment when television had become central to American cultural identity. Sitcoms of her era, including Newhart, shaped the rhythms of family entertainment, offering comfort, laughter, and a sense of familiarity in a rapidly changing world. Her sudden passing reminded fans of the fleeting nature of those cultural touchstones, as the actors who had once been weekly fixtures in living rooms inevitably aged or were lost. It was a reminder of how television could create intimacy between audiences and performers, blurring the line between personal grief and public mourning. The immediate consequence of Frann's death was a wave of surprise and sadness among fans and colleagues. At only 55, she had been poised for continued contributions to the entertainment industry, and her absence left a noticeable gap. While her career had not reached the mythic heights of Hollywood legends, her association with Newhart and other television work ensured that her image remained embedded in the fabric of American popular culture. Her passing amplified her role as a symbol of warmth, elegance, and charm, freezing her in memory as the ever-graceful Joanna. Frann's death underscores the way mortality intersects with memory in popular culture. Unlike larger-than-life figures whose legacies often dominate historical narratives, Frann represents the countless performers who shaped culture in quieter, enduring ways. Humanity immortalizes such figures, not through monuments or epic tales, but through the continued circulation of their work, reruns, tributes, and the fond recollections of audiences who felt a personal connection. Ultimately, Mary Frann's passing illustrates that remembrance is not reserved only for the titans of history. Even in the ordinary rhythms of television and storytelling, art preserves fragments of human warmth, ensuring that figures like Frann remain alive in the shared cultural imagination. Pablo Neruda, the Nobel Prize-winning Chilean poet and one of the most influential literary voices of the 20th century, died on September 23, 1973, at the age of 69. Official accounts attributed his death to heart failure while he was being treated for prostate cancer in Santiago. Yet his passing occurred just days after General Augusto Pinochet's military coup that toppled President Salvador Allende, Neruda's close friend and ally. The timing of his death has long fueled speculation that it may not have been entirely natural, with some alleging possible poisoning. Regardless of the exact cause, Neruda's death was indelibly linked to the turbulence of Chile's political crisis and reflected the dangerous intersection of art, power, and dissent. Neruda had embodied the values and struggles of his era. As a diplomat, senator, and outspoken communist, he used poetry not just to illuminate beauty and love, but also to challenge oppression and injustice. His passing amid political violence symbolized the silencing of intellectual and creative freedom under authoritarian rule. For Chileans and the international community, the loss of his voice at such a precarious moment underscored the vulnerability of artists who dared to confront power. The immediate consequence of his death was profound sorrow, but also fear. His funeral, held under military watch, nonetheless became one of the first public acts of resistance against Pinochet's regime. Mourners chanted Neruda's verses in the streets, transforming his passing into a moment of defiance. Far from erasing his influence, his death amplified his legend, turning him into both a literary and political martyr, whose words continued to inspire generations of readers and activists worldwide. Neruda's death highlights humanity's complex relationship with mortality and memory. While death can silence the individual, it often amplifies the symbolic power of their life's work. In Neruda's case, mortality did not end his voice, but rather cemented it as a weapon of remembrance and resistance. We immortalize figures like him through translations, memorials, and the continued study of his poetry, which remains central to global literature. Ultimately, Neruda's death reveals how art transcends the boundaries of life, power, and oppression. It reminds us that while regimes may seek to silence dissent, the memory of poets and their words live on, eternal witnesses to humanity's longing for freedom and justice. Juliette Greco, the French chanteuse and actress whose smoky voice and commanding presence embodied post-war Parisian culture, died on September 23, 2020, at the age of 93. Her death was attributed to natural causes after a long and celebrated life. Unlike artists whose careers were cut tragically short, Greco lived to witness the endurance of her influence, a fact that reflected her era's deep reverence for resilience, artistry, and survival amid the upheavals of the 20th century. Greco's life was inextricably tied to the challenges of her time. During World War II, she was imprisoned by the Gestapo, and her mother and sister were deported to concentration camps. Surviving these traumas, she later became a symbol of intellectual and cultural freedom in the post-war years. In Paris's Saint-Germain-des-Prés cafes, she became the muse of existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Her death then marked not just the loss of a performer, but the fading of a generation that had turned suffering and disillusionment into art and philosophy. The immediate response to her passing was one of reverence. France mourned not only a singer but also a cultural icon whose voice captured the melancholy and romantic spirit of post-war Europe. Her death amplified her legend by crystallizing her image as la muse de l'existentialisme, a woman who gave emotional expression to the struggles of an era searching for meaning after devastation. For younger generations, her departure became an invitation to rediscover the music, films, and philosophies that defined mid-20th century France. Greco's death reminds us how mortality frames memory and cultural identity. While life is finite, her artistry demonstrates that the human voice, whether sung or spoken, can echo far beyond death. Humanity tends to immortalize figures like Greco by entwining their personal narratives with broader cultural memory. Through film tributes, reissued recordings, and commemorations in French media and literature, her presence remains alive in the collective imagination. Ultimately, Juliette Greco's passing reveals how death can amplify the symbolic resonance of an individual's life. Her voice continues to serve as a bridge between despair and beauty, history and art, reminding us that memory, like song, resists silence. Charles Bradley, the American soul singer, often hailed as the screaming eagle of soul, died on September 23, 2017, at the age of 68, from stomach cancer that later spread to his liver. His death was a natural one, though it followed a period of intense struggle with illness that mirrored the hardships he endured throughout his life. Bradley's passing reflected an era in which late-blooming artistry was finally being celebrated, and his story resonated with audiences who valued perseverance and authenticity in a time when the music industry often favored youth and polished perfection. Bradley's path to recognition was long and arduous. Born in Gainesville, Florida, in 1948 and raised in poverty, he spent decades working odd jobs and performing James Brown impersonations before being discovered by Daptone Records in his 60s. His eventual rise to fame was as much about resilience as it was about music. Thus, when he succumbed to cancer, his death underscored the fragility of hard-earned triumphs and highlighted how success can sometimes arrive late in life, making its loss all the more poignant. The immediate response to his passing was heartfelt. Fellow musicians, critics, and fans mourned not only a voice that carried the grit of lived experience but also a symbol of endurance and hope. His death amplified his legend by transforming him into a figure of almost mythic proportions. The man who never gave up on music, who poured decades of pain and struggle into soul performances that felt raw, unfiltered, and profoundly human. In this sense, Bradley's departure deepened his impact, ensuring that his story would inspire others facing obstacles long after his final performance. Bradley's legacy reflects humanity's deep desire to immortalize those who embody resilience. Through recordings, live concert footage, and documentaries like Soul of America, he continues to speak to audiences as both a cautionary tale of life's hardships and a testament to the power of perseverance. His death reveals how mortality often amplifies meaning. The end of his journey invites reflection on the triumph of authenticity over adversity. In remembering Charles Bradley, we see how art transforms suffering into beauty, and how collective memory preserves such figures as more than entertainers. They become guardians of human dignity, reminding us that it is never too late for a voice to be heard.